If only we had known. Humans are a relatively new species on the galactic stage. A young species, but friendly and inquisitive. When first contact had been established with the species, they fell under the traditional pact of protection. For the first 200 years of their time with the UGF, they were not required to defend themselves. None of the member states of the United Galactic Front were permitted to initiate hostilities with a fledgling member, and no pirate would dare to incur the wrath of the UGF's fleet for breaking this oldest of precepts. Each sentient race acknowledged that making the transition from planet-bound to spacefaring. To help with this transition, whenever a species settles its first colony beyond the bounds of their Genesis planet, they are visited by a coalition representing the primarchs of those that stand at the top of the galactic food chains. Emissaries from the Kithari were traditionally those who initiated contact. They were the first race in the galaxy to ascend to the stars, and the noblest of us all. It is their wisdom that guides the noblest of our galactic laws, and their kindness that has helped to elevate hundreds of fledgling races. They shared with humanity the gift of knowledge, and directed them towards many planets in their galactic neighborhood that were similar to their own. It was a relatively easy task to do, as many of the species of the galaxy could not live on a world like the one which the humans are from. Not too many can survive comfortably in the extreme range of temperatures and gravity that humans can survive in. Sure, the Phyrexians might be able to survive in temperatures as low as 15 of their Earth kelvins, but anything above 30, and their internal organs would start to boil over. And yes, the Phyrexians can survive in the intense heat of a star's core, but if those beings of energy are cooled or exposed to a lower level of pressure than they are accustomed to, their death is a matter of when, not if. To have a survivable range of over 100 degrees is almost unthinkable, and being able to survive on a planet with an even greater range than that, without substantial developments in their species' habitation, technologies was unheard of. It was easy to find planets where this species would thrive, and that should have been our first clue to the level of endurance possessed by these newest members to our galactic stage. The Kithari also shared with them knowledge of galactic territories, sharing with them data on the worlds available to those races, who bore none of the responsibility of protection that the Primarch races had shouldered, so that they might go out and meet their galactic neighbors. The next to share with the humans were the Tizkul. They were the most warlike of the Primarch races, and were eager to meet the species, who had some 100 years ago shot down one of the Tizian research drones keeping tabs on the planet of fledgling sentience. It had been there, monitoring strange radiation signatures coming from the planet, and the delegate of the Tizkul was said to have spoken in private with the human military representatives for hours to figure out all of the finer details of how they'd achieve the feat. When he emerged from the delegation chamber, he seemed pleased with the results of their conversation, and was quick to speak of the promise they had as a species. He was not quick to speak on what they had discussed, but made it clear all the same that even though their technologies were still fairly basic, their mind for war and instinct for it were quite formidable. Then came the Tizian, who were equally impressed at humanity's ability to take down their drone. They found themselves drawn in by the curiosity of the humans and their ingenuity. They talked long about power sources the humans employed, technologies in their settlement, and many other feats the humans had achieved. They exchanged information on xenobiology and made many impressive, even outlandish claims about the things their species were capable in terms of basic biologic processes. They spoke too of their home planet and the other life to be found there. Many of the war beasts, manufactured in the Tizian gin boxes even today, are sampled from creatures the Tizian learned of in this initial meeting. When they concluded their talks with the humans after no fewer than 2 full Earth weeks, the rest of us were starting to grow suspicious that this might be no ordinary race of creatures. If only we had known. It was the humans that ultimately suggested that we hurry the proceedings along. Some of us thought it hubris, others impudence, but I recognize it now as a very prudent decision on their part. Humanity is contradictory in many ways. They are capable of great patience and impatience alike. They are able to experience the full range of emotion, from deepest loathing to purest love. In fact, it's a known fact that the term love is too broad a term to describe the loves that humanity can feel. They have created several different terms for differentiating between different types of love. The same could be said for each of the basic emotions on the emotional spectrum, as they possess a certain fondness for categorizing things that most wouldn't bother to categorize. A trait that endeared them to the low pool, the primary bureaucratic power behind the UGF. The humans put forth the suggestion that they meet with each of the remaining processions in various antechambers located within the building chosen by the humans to be the meeting place for the Primarchs to welcome them. Considering the Tisane's 2-week exchange, the other races present had begun to think perhaps it might not be an unwise decision, if unconventional. Even then, hints of the humans' pragmatic approach to things were present, strange that none of us could see it then. Perhaps we chose to ignore the marvel of a species before us because we were all so sure of our specialized superiority. Perhaps we just didn't look as closely as we should have at them. By that point, for many of us, we were accustomed to a certain status quo in the galaxy. We'd inducted hundreds of species into the UGF, but only 7 had ever attained the status of Primarch. Those that never did were far too common, and there was nothing especially distinctive about their species. They were, like my own race the Surlian, suitably skilled in a variety of different disciplines. However, unlike we Surlians, the human lifespan was pitifully short. A shame, because they showed promise as a potential jack-of-all-trades race, just like ourselves. In the end, we were the only race to admit doubts about the humans' capacity to thrive in a galaxy like ours. Each of the other races saw their potential, saw their room for growth, but we remained stubborn. It would later turn out that, once their race reached certain thresholds of scientific knowledge, they would be able to augment themselves to be some of the longest-lived organisms in the universe. They even joined the Cruxine as the second race to successfully deposit their brains into a post-mortem supercomputer. However, instead of the great cemetery computers of the Cruxine, the humans would simply upload their consciousness into robotic bodies, each powered by miniature human supercomputers. If only we had known! We each met with a contingent of humans, having given them information on which specializations each of our races possessed, and each of our delegations was met with humans specialized in that field. The Lopule met with the human businessmen and explained galactic commerce to the humans, helping prepare their economy for the shift to the galactic standard. The Fenora met with human artists and musicians, and have spoken well of the human capacity for creativity. The Cloakwick spoke with them about infrastructure, architecture, and agriculture, finding that the humans already possess most of the base technology for creating and maintaining livable environments on other worlds. Not that such endeavors were especially useful for humans to pursue considering their already insane range of temporal tolerance, or so we thought at the time. Our own delegation was perhaps at a disadvantage in this regard. We were the universe's best generalists, or so we believed. The panel of people we were sent to meet with were supposedly the same. They spoke to us about a wide variety of human skills. Largely, they were tailored toward survival on the humans' home planet. We did not understand at the time that each of these people were in fact specialists themselves, and the wide range of knowledge they were willing to share about survival, combat, science, and technology, and many other topics the humans considered noteworthy were as translatable to the greater galaxy as they would prove to be. We had assumed many of the skills they spoke of were simply required by all the inhabitants of the planet in order to survive living on a death world as dangerous as theirs appeared to be if their fantastical stories were indeed true. Whether or not the tales this species had to tell of its own exploits, and those that could be found when the Tis Sands helped the planet link itself into the quantum network of information sharing that was one of the greatest marvels of the Titian engineers, none could say. Still, they liked to argue about the possibilities. Surprisingly, the humans had technology compatible with the network already, and within the year the QNet was flooded with stories from the humans. It was one of the fastest integrations in history, but if nothing else can be said of the humans, which obviously much could be, it was that they loved their computers. Having access to the human information network proved to be less informative for many trying to understand the history and culture of humans. The networks the humans had established on their internet were not intuitive for most species, and it was almost impossible for an outside observer to discern the facts from their fictions. Their stories and artworks were great and many, and it was clear why the Phenora had taken a liking to them. However, humans also had their fair share of poor examples to choose from. This was another of the reasons my people dismissed them initially, thinking that the sheer volume mistakes they proudly displayed was indicative of a flawed and imperfect race. If only we had known. Humans were a race that thrived on imperfection. Throughout their history, they had thrown everything against the wall just to see what stuck, to borrow an idiom from the species in question. With each mistake they grew, with each flaw they learned. They were built to adapt, and adapt they did. If one were to look at a Phenoran painter's works 2 years apart, one might detect very little difference. At an early age, those of the Phenora species choose an artistic specialization based on their own innate talents and master it fairly quickly. However, a human artist does not develop in the same way. In fact, human progression timelines, as they called them, were at the time a wildly contended idea. It would be easy to take art from multiple sources and attribute them to the same author, with timestamps indicating how much time had passed between drawings. Anyone could have done so and claimed it to be true, but common sense would tell you that simply makes no sense. And yet, for the humans it did. That isn't to say that the idea of someone who is naturally gifted in a certain area was foreign to them, though their appearance in human society was much less common than elsewhere in the galaxy. They simply chose a field they liked and continued to adapt in it until they had the skill they needed to excel. We members of the Prime March races, specifically those of us from the first delegations to visit them and judge their worthiness to join the UGF, were unanimous in our decision to include them in our collective. While my race had their doubts about their ultimate viability, there had been many races accepted into our number that were less viable, and we had made it possible for them to live happy and productive lives safe in the core systems of the galaxy where UGF control is strongest. Oftentimes, this would tragically mean that they'd have to abandon their Genesis world. The humans' homeworld was located in what was considered difficult space. Hailing from the Orion Spur, roughly halfway between the center of the galaxy and the galactic horizon, they were insulated from the greatest threats beyond the bounds of the UGF. However, that did mean they were living in the middle of an arm known to be home to many pirate worlds, which was a rather uncharitable name for the species who'd refused assistance in affiliation with the UGF. Though, to be fair, most of them did wind up acting as pirates in some capacity or another. In addition to that, there were many worlds which bore dangerous flora and fauna, but had no trace of sentience located on their arm. We expected these hurdles to be too great for them, and expected they'd be requiring assistance regularly until their technology level could catch up to the galactic mean. It was also expected that the humans would be required to leave their Genesis world sooner, rather than later, in order to make new lives on a safer world in a safer corner of the galaxy. When it came out that many of these worlds, both pirate and wild planets alike, had been on the list of planetary coordinates provided to the humans by the representative of the Kidhari, half of us let out a wail of despair for the grievous oversight. But the Kidhari are wise. We should have known at that point that this was no ordinary race. The calls for help never came. As human ships began to spread out into their local galaxy, it was not a transition done without blood. It never is. New species will branch out and find themselves too curious and too ill-prepared to brave the hellish maelstrom that is interplanetary travel and exploration. Usually, when a species moves off of their home world, it is for one of two reasons. Firstly, they could be establishing drone mining operations on other planets within their own system. These types of species tend to be more industrial, more suited to traveling the stars, as they tend to design systems that allow for them to set measured goals and reach a measured level of success, equivalent to their level of technology. The second reason a species tends to have to branch out is overpopulation. The point in time when a Genesis world becomes too cramped for the species to comfortably live there is one of the many filters that can prevent a species from surviving. These species are usually unruly, difficult to maintain, and prone to a certain lack of foresight that makes it difficult for them to handle the rigors of space travel. There is simply so much that must be planned for in order for a species to find success, and without that level of cognizant thought, they are doomed to fail again and again until the flame of exploration dies out and they deem the effort simply too dangerous. This was the type of reasoning the humans had for colonizing planet Sol 4 in their system, and so our expectations were low. I say are here to indicate my species, as I've stated before. The other Primarch races were all filled with high expectations of the humans. Only we were blind back then. You see, we didn't understand human thinking. We didn't understand the way their technology had come about, nor did we understand the lengths they had always been willing to go through in order to test their new technologies. To be suddenly gifted dozens of technologies beyond their previous level was akin to sitting a Lionel-like craft down on an asteroid made entirely of gypsum. Sure, they would know it would be foolish to leave the airlock and get a quick taste of the addictive mineral, but what Lionel could resist that temptation? Human scientists were much the same way. Within 1 decade, they'd slapped together rudimentary cruisers and frigates and had them out exploring their local galactic neighborhood. Within 20 years, a human embassy was established on every UGF planet within 150 light-years of their Genesis world. Within 50, humanity had built massive colony ships set to begin spreading the seeds of humanity to even the furthest reaches of our galaxy. Now, perhaps I am skipping ahead a bit. The 2 decades before that milestone, which is still being felt today, were 2 of the bloodiest decades humans have seen since entering the UGF. It is difficult when talking about humans not to skip around a bit, especially when one is recollecting their history and impact on the galactic stage. They have simply done so much that is worth telling about. Having mentioned their bloody decades that truly catapulted them to their status as a household name in the galactic community, I believe it's important to describe the circumstances that led up to those times. I find myself uniquely qualified to talk about this period of history, having been one of those who lived it. Still, discerning between that history as I understand it now and the idea I had of what was going on at the time is not a simple thing to do. I have studied the histories of this time, extensively though, and feel more prepared than most to give an accurate portrayal of not just the events that unfolded, but the factors at work in the humans' collective consciousness at the time that allowed the events to unfold as they did. Of the events and the many factors at play, human psychology is perhaps one of the most difficult concepts to grasp, so I might as well start there, so we can get it out of the way. It's long been agreed upon that sentience comes to us in many forms. The Pilkmai, for instance, hail from a garden world and are themselves plant hominids. They do not live the same kind of lives as we do, nor can they communicate as we can. They speak by creasing their fronds in specific patterns as they follow a local star's path across the sky. When creasing their fronds in this fashion, they release very specific patterns of pollen, which can be received and then deciphered into an actually quite sophisticated and expressive language. It might take them a week to have a conversation that would take an average sentient species mere minutes, but their intelligence is undeniable. When it was discovered that most of the species of tree on planet Sol 3 were also sentient, the revelation was a matter which horrified the humans, even if they had by and large stopped the majority of their lumbering in favor of using materials compatible with their rapidly advancing matter printing technology. Perhaps you think I am rambling on about these seemingly unrelated matters because I'm dreading delving into the mess that is the field of human psychology, and you'd be half right. The truth of it, though, is even things like that, things like the humans' reaction of horror to learning what they had done, and the lengths they went through after the fact to make reparations, a word which is another concept that was foreign to much of the galaxy prior to the introduction of humanity, and a reminder of their own internal history of blood and constant competition. This is a species drawn to violence made for it, who will do anything to win in a conflict. None could blame them for it, not for the trees, nor for their own internal violence. Life on a death world is not easy. Dog-eat-dog, I believe, is the human expression for the mindset one must have to thrive under those sorts of conditions, and thrive they did. At the expense of their fellow man, they would raise themselves through horrid means. Reparations are offerings given to those who were wronged in wars. If a human does something so vile to achieve victory, or to flourish personally, they would sometimes go to great lengths to make amends for it. There are even instances of humans displaying this behavior generations after the transgressions took place. To most this would sound naive, but when one understands the ways in which humanity has developed better, it makes perfect sense. Humanity has perhaps the most malleable brain in the known galaxy. It is how they adapt. At first, they used this to survive their death world. Then, when they had conquered the planet, they used this to tackle arts, science, language, and even athletics. No matter what a human decides to do, they do so thinking constantly of ways to improve their performance in that field. Their bodies experience a phenomenon known as muscle memory, allowing them to instinctively respond to stimuli they are not themselves consciously aware of. The existence of the human subconscious, which differs from the common autonomous task brain structures found in most sentient brains. There are so many ways in which humans are capable of changing themselves on an individual level. It only makes sense that they also possess mechanisms for growing their collective consciousness as well. That is the true driving force of humanity's explosion onto the galactic scene. Their obsessive need to understand the new realities they were being faced with, their primal urge to conquer, their desire to exist in a way that they can be proud of, and their willingness to make amends for their mistakes. These traits and so many more would prove essential to their unlikely success and subsequent rise to prominence. Speaking personally, their transition from a world fragmented and divided into over 100 countries and thousands of political parties into a unified galactic conglomerate containing dozens of sentients was something nobody could have predicted, not even the humans themselves. It makes sense, though, when you stop to think about it. What else would happen when you take a predator, give it empathy, intelligence, and ideas of morality? Where else but a death world like theirs would predators ever have the need to develop a social drive? So what do you think happens when you take a species who had been advancing their own technologies at a nearly exponential rate for the last few hundred years of their history prior to their first contact, who had managed to shoot down a highly advanced alien research drone, and who had been studying it to reverse engineer its individual components, and you give them a gift of technological know-how? To say that the humans were obsessive in their attempts to fully understand the knowledge we had shared is to understate it, and that's not even taking note of the human phenomenon of hackers and their unbelievable ability to extract information from networks in unforeseeable ways. No, the human drive for knowledge, their quantifiably suicidal curiosity, and the many technologies they were given reshaped their whole society within the span of a decade. Every aspect of human life changed, from their production methods, to their refinement techniques, to the things that they taught their children in schools. All of it immediately and dramatically changed as humanity collectively absorbed the information we had given them, as well as the information we had given them access to. Still, it was an easy thing to underestimate them. Their first 100 ships fitted with FTL drives exploded either upon activation, upon exit from FTL space, or in one very nearly tragic instance, in the middle of FTL space. The resulting collateral damage from that fallout included the entirety of the VSP-03 system, which was flagged for colonization by the Veloportari. Their colony ship was none too pleased when arriving at the edge of the system and finding a black hole where their new colony was meant to be, and the pre-March races wound up absorbing the financial hit in place of the Terrans, who were lucky enough to have caused the incident while under the Pact of Protection, and who had not yet fully transitioned into using the Galactic Standard, and so could not even pay the hefty fines if they'd wanted to. All of this was more or less in line with what we Surlians had expected of humanity. Like most species who began fearing the dangers of space due to overpopulation, they lacked the planning and preparation to undergo space flight until they didn't. Their access to our technology did a lot of things for them. One of the first obvious changes was the introduction of the first spacefaring human AIs. In the end, their solution to not having a brain compatible with FTL technology was to simply build themselves a new one. These AIs were capable of making advanced computations and calculations in impossible small amounts of time. Not only that, but they were each linked to a singular computer back on Earth through quantum entanglement. The AI was capable of learning from its own mistakes and learned how to adapt to the rigors of space travel without needing a test run. In fact, the humans had been feeding it data from the previous several dozen attempts, allowing its maiden voyage to be its and humanity's first successful FTL navigation. Most of us thought that humanity would give up after their 10th ship met its doom. Many more thought that by 50, they would be locked in their home system forever. But none of us expected they would continue trying for an additional 50 ships. Thousands of human lives were snuffed in their attempts to stand with the rest of us as spacefaring races, but still they managed to succeed in the end. It was fitting that their 101st ship, the first with the AI on board, was named the USS Memory, as it stood as a reminder for those who had lost their lives in their attempts to join those of us among the stars, as well as a slight nod to the AI that would allow them to ultimately succeed. The fact that this AI never rose up against the humans is also a fact worth noting. Few AIs have ever been developed that weren't eventually hostile to their creators. In fact, the human AI Albiona, as they aptly called it, was the first ever developed outside of those created by the Tis Sons. The humans have since created many more useful AI, all of which reside on their home planet Earth, where they interact with each other as well as other humans. As it turns out, positive social interaction is as much a need for AIs as it is for most other sentients in the galaxy, and was instrumental in their upbringing. To this day, all human ships are linked directly to Albiona. It is a comfort for spacefaring humans to know that their ancient AI companion will remember them, even if they die in solitude out among the stars. The USS Memory was a scientific vessel, and it had been en route to the TUF-2 system, known to the humans as Alpha Centauri. It was the system nearest to their own, only a measly 1.34 parsecs from their own home system, barely a stone's throw from most FTL drives, but to them, it was a monumental achievement. Never, in all of their failures, did they ever give up on the dream of standing among the stars. Their collective passion for exploration was far too great to be dissuaded, no matter the cost to human life their exploration required. If only we had known. Not all humans were scientists, but all humans idealized science and its virtues to an insane degree. Those who made massive leaps in scientific progress were revered among humans as great men. Even non-human scientists are well revered by humans, especially if they happen to be the first to figure something out. That is why there are so many human names attached to universal constants these days, as it is a human custom to allow the first to discover something the honor of naming it, or else to name it after them. That is a mechanism by which their earlier predecessors managed to immortalize themselves, well before humanity ever managed to eliminate the threat of old age from their species. With the invention of their new quantum AI companion, human ships began spreading to every system in their neighborhood. Even systems in which there were no habitable planets soon found themselves dotted with human stations and mining operations. There was no such thing as a system too forlorn for humans to take an interest. I once asked a human about this peculiar aspect of human space travel. I think specifically I asked why they bother to populate any system they come across first, and I received a shrug in response. The human in question went on to tell me, "You never know when it'll come in handy," as if I was the silly one for having asked. If I had known how the humans would use those systems, perhaps I would have had the good graces to feel silly as well. But how could I have known? How could any of us? Once this work had all been completed, humans began to expand out into the cosmos at an exponential rate. They would move into habitable systems, construct habitable stations in inhospitable systems, and use all of these operational bases to scout out other near systems. Even with their earliest FTL drives, which could only hop 1 or 2 systems away from wherever they were, they still expanded. As their technology levels improved, the efficiency with which they expanded also improved. It did not take long for the technological advances to make their way towards the fringes of human-controlled space once they were tested and confirmed to be useful by their scientists back on Earth, thanks in part to their quantum computers and their marvelous AI to deliver pertinent information to those who could use it. Human entities known as corporations were given freedom to establish their own colonies and operational bases. The humans operated under a philosopher they called finders keepers in regards to settling the stars. So long as a system wasn't already settled by sentient races, they were free to flag anything they came across as their personal property, only requiring to pay the standard taxes to their government for any profits turned by the industrious explorers. Again, their AI proved instrumental in handling these interactions, as it provided an immediate line of communication back to their home world, and instantaneous flagging of marked resources and bodies. One caveat was that one had to physically be there in order to make a claim, as the humans experienced a massive volume of scientists with sufficiently advanced telescopes trying to make vast claims when they discovered new systems or planets that might fit into their habitable zone, being measured by the planet's distance from a star. Of course, this human exploration did not go without conflict. They had conflicts both with each other and with members of the pirate races in their local galactic neighborhood. If it wasn't the massive scale battle with the HFY a few decades later, these original conflicts were what made people really start paying attention to the humans' progression, or rather, the way in which humans handled these pirate conflicts. As is customary, the different Primarch races, the burden of monitoring new species of sentience, is a toil shared between us all. Using Tijan monitoring systems, we each take one rotation of the Kithari homeworld around its brown dwarf star, the standard for the universal rotation metric. For any humans reading this account, that is roughly 1.45 of your Earth years. As it so happened, we Sir Lions were monitoring the humans when they had their first conflict with pirates from the planet in the TUF-54 system. Back then it was known as the UPS-382 system, however. I'll continue to call it the TUF-54 system though, as no UPS systems remain on the galactic stage today. TUF-54 was a system controlled by the Corva. They were a race of mammalian hominids, sharing similar characteristics with the marsupials of Earth. Like the humans, their kind had evolved on a death world. Unlike humanity, though, they had been too proud to accept the gifts of technology offered by the UGF, preferring to make their own way into the stars. They had populated every habitable planet in their home system thoroughly before their breakthrough discovery of a primitive FTL travel. They could only maintain an FTL flight for a few seconds, but coupled with their admittedly impressive cryogenic technology and their species' innate tolerance of the physically demanding price of cryogenic stasis allowed them to spread to other systems gradually. They weren't the most powerful of the pirate sentients known to the UGF, but they were much more advanced than the humans were in many ways. Hostilities were initiated after human traders began using the system as a throughway in between human systems located on either side of Corva's system. It started small-scale, a few skirmishes with the human civilian ships that had been using the system as a convenient trade lane. After their first few losses, humans began traveling with what we believed at the time to be human military ships. This resulted in the Corvans responding in kind with reinforcements arriving in the system only half a cycle after hostilities began. My kind made ready for the inevitable calls for assistance that the humans would put out. We were perhaps more than a little bit eager to censure the humans for draining even more resources from the Primarch races. It was after all their own foolhardiness and greed that led them to using the pirate system for convenience. We began to grow suspicious when the calls never came, despite the fact that our monitoring equipment clearly showed that the humans were losing the majority of their skirmishes. They failed to ever hail for assistance, however, and continued skirmishing there for many of their months. Each time the Corvans would increase security in the system, the humans would turn up their level of aggression. When the Corvans fielded frigates, the humans fielded destroyers. When the Corvans responded with high-powered lasers to bore holes through the human vessels, the humans responded by developing energy shielding technology. They fought in the system for over a year before the humans finally fielded their first Dreadnought-class cruiser, a massive ship outfitted with carbon steel hulls no thinner than 300 feet and on any given surface. It's not as if it was a solid carbon steel wall, however, as every few feet there were empty spaces accessible to their engineers filled to the brim with energy shielding generators. While most ships would be content with 5 or perhaps 10 generators if they were concerned about having backups, this human dreadnought had hundreds. There were redundancies built in for when the redundancies for their redundancies failed. Apparently this technology was one they had devised for the purposes of driving directly through stars if the need ever arose, which was their insane response to learning of the existence of the Phyrexians. The vessel was named the USS Diplomacy, and was deployed in orbit next to the primary satellite of their colony world. It sat there in high orbit, sending out communication requests to those hostile Corvans below. For days, the Corvans threw everything they had at the impressive monstrosity of military machinery. They exhausted themselves trying to crack its hull, all the while the humans broadcast a simple message to them on every channel. This has gone on long enough. Let's talk. Eventually, the Corvans realized they would not destroy the behemoth in orbit above their planet, and they agreed to speak. The humans had managed to gather enough data from intercepted Corvan communications that the UGF standard universal translators were able to decode their language. Delegates from the human ship and the Corvan colony planet met on a Corvan station in low orbit. A few things became clear after this incident. Firstly, the human powers of diplomacy were something to marvel at. It is not well known exactly what was discussed by the humans and the Corvans during the course of these events. What is known is that the humans and the Corvans spoke to each other for months. At one point during our monitoring of the situation, dozens of Corvan fleets warped into the system over the course of a few days. Each flagship of each fleet bore the markings of one of their high kings, and it was later confirmed that this was the first meeting of each of the generations. In fact, it hadn't been done since the UGF first approached the species after discovering they'd already colonized multiple systems without our awareness. Though they chose not to join the UGF in those days, apparently the Terrans made a much more appealing offer. Getting a Corvan High King to leave the planet they rule is no simple feat. Corvins are mistrustful of each other as a rule, and even less trustful of outsiders. Couple that with the fact that humans look eerily similar to abominable figures in the Corvin mythos, and that makes what took place there all the more impressive. After their months of discussion, humanity announced to the galaxy that they were now operating under the name of the Terran United Federation. Not only that, but the Corvins were joining their federation, and by extension, the UGF. Trade lanes were established, divergent technologic paths converged, and both species found numerous ways to benefit from each other. Humans and Corvins alike began settling on each other's planets. The Corvins provided the humans with knowledge of other pirate races in their arm of the galaxy, as well as access to their engineering bays. It was true that the human ship proved too much for their weapons to penetrate, but the Corvin weapons were still superior to the humans' weaponry. Not only that, but their engines, FTL drives, and, in my personal opinion, aesthetics were all superior to the human ships, which were essentially repurposed hunks of steel that somehow managed to be sturdy enough to survive FTL jumps. With the exception of the massive hunk of metal that was the USS Diplomacy, nothing the humans had in their arsenal was even considered average by the galactic standard. That went for the Corvins as well, who, while one of the more expansive of the pirate races, had never been one of the more feared races of pirates like the Clark or the Bantara. They were classified as territorial, but mostly harmless as far as pirate races go. It turns out that the humans and Corvins had pretty different ideas about what was important when designing a starship. While the humans were far more advanced than the Corvins in terms of material science and energy sources for their ships, Corvins had been making passable ships without the more advanced materials by being that much better at mechanics than humans were. Their ships were more efficient by almost every metric. The engines had better fuel consumption rates and generated less waste heat than the human vessels did. They helped the humans optimize their ships in ways they never would have even thought of without a few more decades of spacefaring experience under their belts. Likewise, the humans provided the Corvins with human-made materials and taught them of their known uses, as well as showed them the many promising studies involving the materials and other possible uses for them. It was immediately obvious that the two races were each mutually benefiting from their relationship, and after roughly a year or integration, each of the human world leaders released this statement, or something very similar to it in their native tongues. Last official speech of President Daniel Saxton. My fellow Americans, this is the last time I'll be able to address you as such. I know we've all been busy working like hell to go out and explore the stars, and make our claims out there among the stars. The industrial boom we've been experiencing ever since first contact has been the most prolific boom in our collective history. If there's one thing that our little altercation with our new Corvin allies has taught us, it's that out among the stars things are different than we're used to. To put it lightly, we got lucky. That whole incident was caused by a single smuggler trying to avoid proper trade lanes, and the backlash could have potentially made its way to Earth if things had gone on much longer. We got lucky. We need to understand that most races out there in the galaxy are unified, and it's high time we were too. Any one of us can start an incident out there, and if we cannot respond to potential threats together, then we aren't going to make it as far as we would want. We'll be entering into a transitional government with the other nations of the Earth. This might not be an easy transition, but the leaders of our world have been discussing possibilities for how it would work quietly ever since first contact. As a species, we've begun operating under the flag of the Terran United Federation, along with our new Corvin friends. It's time for us all to come together and make the name mean something. Our council will include current leaders of the nations of Earth, as well as each of the Corvin High Kings. For now, it's just going to be a provisional council until the lot of us can come together and agree on something that works for all of us. We're still not quite sure what that'll look like, but until then we'll be able to address issues that we as a species will face going forward. Not too much is going to change immediately. We still have to get together and ratify a new system of law that we can all agree on. That will take some time, but until then we'll be sticking with the current regional rule of law. Once we've finished working out the kinks, I hope to address you again as a member of the TUF Council. Until then, keep doing what we've been doing. We've still got a lot of work to get done if we're going to catch up to the rest of the galaxy. We all hope that our new unity will make that a bit more doable. Our best scientists are already sharing notes with their former competition overseas, as well as our new friends beyond the stars. Things are going to be changing for all of us pretty soon. Well, more than they already have, that is. He left his speech there, fleeing the stage to allow his subordinates to field an onslaught of questions from the demanding public, but it worked. Within a few years, the Terrans had a system in place that helped them more effectively address the issues that had arisen from their rapid expansion. Eventually, the system they settled on allowed one representative from each planet in TUS space to have a chair. This system was difficult in its own ways, but it proved remarkably useful when the Terrans began taking other races into their federation. Which they did. Humans, as it turns out, always experience their greatest technological innovations during times of conflict, and there was much conflict in their future. One by one, the Terrans' newfound federation began absorbing pirate races. At first, we assumed they were illegally vassalizing races that weren't strictly under protection of the UGF. It was not uncommon for some of the less savory members of our galactic convention to acquire slave labor in secret from the various pirate races, but it was pretty immediately clear that each new species the TUF consumed were granted equal standing with the others. Some of us on the Prime March Council looked on with concern, but the Kithari suggested we observe a while longer with that knowing tone they like to employ. Only a fool argues with the Kithari. I should have known. I regret to say that I didn't agree with the Council's decision to simply sit and observe. The humans weren't even an eighth of the way through their pact of protection, and already they were conquering pirates and putting together fleets that could rival those of any lesser race in the UGF. They weren't quite to the level of US Primarchs, but we had been growing our power for millennia, and they for decades. I was growing concerned, and I shared my concerns with the people I represented. This would inadvertently lead to my people's shameful involvement in the TUFAC conflict. If only we had known. This story focuses on humanity's journey to the galactic arena. In other words, it starts with a deep dive into human psychology. You can see how humans are attracted to violence, but they also have a strong sense of empathy and adaptability. We then move on to technological advances like AI companions and faster-than-light travel. What's really cool is that it connects their psychology with advances in technology and shows how their curiosity and thirst for knowledge keep them moving forward despite obstacles. It's as if their thinking shapes their performance and vice versa. All things considered, this is a truly fascinating story that provides a deep insight into humanity's role in the universe. What about your opinion? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. And just a huge thank you for involved in today's stories, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.